This is Michael Luchies, Communications Manager for After School, the largest teen-focused social network in the U.S. And this is the After School Social Change with Technology interview series. I'm joined today by David Ryan Polgar. David is a speaker, consultant, and tech commentator. He co-founded the Digital Citizenship Summit and is now focusing his efforts on the upcoming #Digital for Good event coming up September 18th. And he's also the Chief of Trust and Safety for Friendbase. David, thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm doing very well, but thank you for having me, Michael.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So how do you define digital citizenship? We hear a lot about it. How would you define it?
Yeah, I like to have those quick kind of elevator pitches. So for digital citizenship, I like to say that it's the safe, savvy, and ethical use of social media and technology. And actually, that's what I thought was kind of interesting. That a few years ago, when I really was diving deep into digital citizenship, that's what I kind of found was that everybody struggled with the definition. What's the definition? And I really thought, personally, that unless people can have a quick, easy definition to remember, it's harder for a concept to be shared and to spread. So that's where I like to go with something simple as the safe, savvy, and ethical use of social media and technology. And it focuses really on the two major areas of digital citizenship, which is obviously the online safety component, but also equally as important is the idea that we don't want to be a bystander, so to speak, and we want to kind of have that counter speech, and we want to really train people to be educated, empowered, and engaged as digital citizens.
And why is it so important?
Well, it's so important because we start realizing that the web doesn't happen to us. I like to say that we are the web, right? So that's really where it comes down to empowerment. Oftentimes we like to think that, trolls are these mythical beasts, but if you really think about it, trolls are our neighbors, potentially our friends. And what I really mean by that is to say that any type of online behavior, especially toxic behavior that we're trying to reduce and lessen, that all derives from some type of place, right? So digital citizenship as a concept and as kind of this educational type of pursuit is really so crucial because we want to start thinking of the social and behavioral skills, and that's really what digital citizenship is doing. Unfortunately, I think sometimes we confuse it and we think of it as a concept that we learn, right? So if I learn about the Louisiana Purchase, that's a concrete concept that I learn, and it's finite, right? I learn it, and it's over, and it's done. There's no more material. Whereas something like digital citizenship, it's alive, right? So it's constantly changing, and something that we, as educators, as speakers, as just concerned citizens, we want to constantly be engaged and to be informed about what's kind of new on some of these issues. So I think that's what's really crucial. It's something that needs to be embedded within our school districts, and that's why we have a lot of people throughout the country, great organizations that are actively pursuing this kind of endeavor. But then also just as general citizens, we want to be more aware, because frankly that's one thing that I've noticed is the biggest issue is that we tend to not be very deliberate when we are using kind of digital tools. We and some part of that is by design, that we go into a social platform and we just kind of zone out and we don't think about what we're posting. And a lot of really what digital citizenship is about saying, okay, well, I want to be cognizant that there's other people there, because oftentimes it's a very solitary pursuit, right? We're alone on our smartphone, but we're actually not alone when we're communicating. But in addition, equally as important as the idea of thinking about what you're posting is the idea of counter speech, and that we can help out the community, right? Any type of city, and the online community is very similar to a city. It's reliant on its citizens to really be its backbone, right? So that in an online community type of scenario, that would be if you see something that you think is inappropriate, this is where you want to take it on as your own obligation. You want to feel empowered to say, you know what, I disagree with what's being done here, really stand up for that other person, but also utilize the social media platform and the tools that they have to report something, to block something, and really kind of working with it. Again, not taking a hands-off approach. Digital citizenship and really just improving the web in general, which I think a lot of people are obviously very concerned about and doing right now, it's not something that's going to be solved either by citizens or by the social media companies. It's actually going to be a tandem type of pursuit, or actually multiple stakeholders, where you are combining with educators that are producing great material, you're involving parents that are educating their children, and then you're dealing directly with students, and then you're dealing with social media companies to be a little more responsive about how they deal with a lot of these issues.
And yeah, I really appreciate your perspective on that, just because so many times people don't necessarily think about the companies being part of the solution.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, and yeah, here at After School, we definitely try to be part of that solution and take that, it takes a village approach to digital citizenship.
It certainly does, and that's what kind of drew me into actually reaching out, for a lot of this conversation. Is I think that's kind of the wave of the future, is that a lot of social media companies they're realizing that taking a more proactive stance on digital citizenship is something that needs to happen, right? You probably saw a few days ago, even Google, is getting highly involved right now in digital citizenship and just releasing a program for greater involvement. Again, kind of this empowerment and education for digital citizens.
One of the things you mentioned is that a lot of times we jump into technology and we don't really think about the way we're using it. So when it comes to teens there's tens of millions of social media users that are under the age of 18, how can we best teach them about digital citizenship in a way that relates with them and gets them interested in being involved?
Well, that's where I'm really happy to have some involvement as a board member of the group I Can Help, because what I like about I Can Help, Matt Soeth and Kim Carr doing terrific work there, is that they're really taking a student-centric approach, and then also Ann Collier, who works with the I Can Help line. And what I mean by that is oftentimes we really kind of impose this adult idea of what we think, a 14-year-old should do. Obviously, it's very important to have those certain kind of social mores and expectations that we understand as adults. But I think oftentimes we fall into this trap of kind of just imposing our own kind of beliefs. And at the end of the day, that's kind of a fool's errand, right? Because I'm a 38-year-old, white male. That comes with its benefits and its limitations. So if you really want to think about what does a 14-year-old need and want, this is where you need to actually talk to that 14-year-old and then find out and let them, really be empowered in that conversation and actively kind of push forward what's needed and what's desired, right? Because oftentimes what might be intuitive to an adult is not intuitive to that 14-year-old.
And one of the topics you've spoken about is mental obesity. We were talking about this a little bit before we started this conversation. Now, how I understand it is that because we live in the information age and have unlimited access to information, we're constantly consuming more and more without necessarily digesting that information. And I kind of see this problem as possibly getting worse before it gets better. Do you agree with that, and how can this be stopped?
Yeah, well, you know what? Here's the good part. I am very optimistic about how everything is going to progress. But the reason where mental obesity comes about is really just kind of an offshoot of the concept of information overload, of how we are processing or not processing information. One of the questions that I oftentimes get asked, speaking, actually I'd say the most common question is, how many hours a day should my child use technology or be in front of screens, and the screen time question, right? But you really can't answer that question with a definite hour time, because what it comes down to is, are you taking the adequate amount of time to digest that material, right? Because information goes to knowledge and then goes down to the deepest level of critical thinking, or what we call wisdom. So the key part, and the reason why I use that, hopefully catchier phrase in mental obesity, is we need some visual to say, well, how have we been impacted by this infinite amount of information? So if you kind of continue on and the analogy of mental obesity, I think it's very similar to the struggle that we've had, if you think about the 20th century, I think the focus was on the body, and the 21st century is on cognitive skills. So in the 20th century, we went from having a limited amount of food, right, worldwide, to now an infinite amount for developed countries. And what has happened is, from an evolutionary standpoint, we're biased to consume so much food, right? Because food is something that was limited, and then we're trained to just find it attractive and find it enjoyable. And what tastes better, right? Good food or bad food, right? The saltier and the fattier food is, the better it tastes. So we've seen a downside of that, because now we're constantly having to say, well, I'm struggling with my weight, right? How do I find a certain diet? I think that's why we use those terms when we're talking about digital, because we need, again, a greater visualization, something we can imagine. So that's why we use the terms like digital diet, digital detox, right? Trying to find out kind of information overload, try to find something that we can relate to. And I think the food analogy tends to work. Obviously, not perfect, and nothing is. But I think with mental obesity, the key part is really just to say, we as consumers of information, we need to occasionally step away from that flood so we can digest it. And it's not anti-anything, really. It's actually positive. I mean, I'm online all the time. I read hours and hours a day. But at the same time, I still realize that in the 21st century, and just as a human in general, what's most beneficial is my ability to critically think about that information, not just consume it, right? Data and information, frankly, is not important anymore in 2017 if you can Google everything, right? What's going to be important is my or anybody else's ability to connect divergent thoughts and to come up with creative thinking. And really the easiest way to conceive of this is to say, well, when's the time that you think of your most creative thought? Nobody says, oh, you know what, it was when I had 5 open browsers and my phone was going off and then I was checking Facebook and I was going on Instagram. It's always, hey, you know what, it was when I was on a hike. I was at the beach, right? Well, you really have to start thinking about that. Our times of reflection are crucial. And that's where I use kind of the phrase to continue on with digital digestion, is that similar to how we need to occasionally stop eating and digest our food and relax, I really think that it works in a similar fashion with our cognitive types of abilities, that it's great, right? Online, it's amazing how much content and great information we have, but at the same time, if I can never put that away, I can never actively think about it.
And one of the problems that we see digital citizenship addressing is bullying on the web, cyberbullying.
Yep.
Do you see digital citizenship as the solution or just a piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, it's certainly the piece of the puzzle. And really what we want to focus on there is, again, as we kind of said earlier, that it's a combination of tools. That digital citizenship is going to be the kind of the educational tool, and that really it kind of extends to this idea that you want to have these citizens who are educated and empowered, right, and engaged. But then it goes with, as we were kind of referring to, goes with the social media companies of saying, okay, well, now if I want to report something on Twitter, I need to know where are the tools that I can use. I need to know how I can block something. Even just on a personal level. The other day on Twitter, I noticed that somebody had used my name, like there was a impersonation account, right? So it was really important in that moment for me to say, okay, well, that's problematic. But I don't want to just, curse it and say, well, that's terrible. I want to say, okay, well, now I need to report that. Likewise, if there was any type of harassing behavior towards me or anybody else, the quicker and the more intuitive a tool is, the more effective that's going to be. In addition, something I always like to kind of think about is I've always been really inspired by out of the Chicago area. There's a team who started something called Rethink, right, which is based just on this idea that by creating a certain tool that utilizes machine learning to scan language and stopping something that looks inappropriate, if it allows the user to rethink and say, you know what, you might not want to post this, the negative comments dramatically go down. And I think that the key part there is that it imposes a certain level of friction. I like to call it like our online Jiminy cricket. And I think, frankly, that's what people are struggling with, is that always in our social aspects of the real world, right? There's always been a level of friction. If I want to, yell at somebody, I usually have to walk up to them and I look at their face, and that changes my own emotions. That might calm me down. I think about something, or the classic poison pen letter. Well, before it gets sent out in the mail, I rip it up, right? Online is dramatically different, because when it goes from my head to what is said, there's no time. There's no friction, and that in itself can be somewhat problematic, and it really then behooves us as society to educate and to, again, constantly make people aware. And I think that's the key part that, frankly, hasn't been picked up enough on the digital citizenship front conversation, is that so much is dependent on a certain awareness. Oftentimes we log into something, and it's easy to just kind of have our eyes glaze over and say, oh my God, I'm just within this own kind of world or universe. I'm just posting something, and you're not constantly aware of yourself and others.
One of the things you mentioned a little bit earlier in our talk was about bystanders and how they can help, be digital citizens and kind of help out the whole online community in pointing things out, making sure they're addressing things that they're seeing that aren't right in a certain community. So how can people in general, how would you recommend that they stand up for others when they see someone being bullied, for example?
Sure. Well, this is where Matt Selleck at I Can Help is really focused on, and then with Kim Clark, is this idea of counter speech. And really what they were finding when I was having a conversation with them recently is that from a student perspective, by the bystander effect, right, that tends to be a more adult-centric kind of way of framing it, where students, they tend to be more into the counter speech idea, which really kind of the same premise. But with counter speech, what it's doing is working on easy ways that you might be able to respond. So some of the things that they're working on is saying, okay, well, if you were dealt with this situation, if you saw this type of toxic behavior online, here are some sample ways that you might be able to respond. So I think that's the key part. We've really struggled with this concept of how do we deal with trolls. Oftentimes we like to use the phrase, well, don't feed the trolls, right? But that in itself can be somewhat problematic and very hands-off. We still want to create these tools to adequately engage to a certain extent in the conversation where we can lessen that behavior. Oftentimes people like to say, well, how can we lower like the digital drama, so to speak? And I think that's really what we're working on with counter speech, is saying we don't want to incite more anger online, but if we can kind of nip something in the, so to speak, that can be extremely effective, right? Obviously, it doesn't work in 100% of the cases, but it's something that can be helpful, really, in most scenarios. So again, I think that's the way that the digital citizenship conversation is going, is saying, okay, now we can actually provide all these tools. We can do additional research and have that information sharing. And that's frankly what excites me about the digital citizenship community, is that it's really built on a kind of sharing mentality for all intents and purposes. So when somebody's doing something amazing in a school in Kenosha, Wisconsin, right, they share that out to the larger community, and it can now be used in a school in Orange County, right? That's really what you want. And I think you're going to see the same thing with quote-unquote bystander or counter speech, is that people are going to start finding, okay, here are these effective tools, and now here's what we do on it. Again, that's really what I want to focus on, Michael, is that digital citizenship is not static, right? What we talked about last year is already outdated, and that we need to start thinking, okay, well, what about if people start using, Snap spectacles? What about the new concerns with live stream? What about a new app that didn't exist last year, right? How do we deal with that? We need to constantly be evolving and thinking about new tools and new techniques.
And speaking of new things, anonymity in social networks is something that obviously we've been seeing a lot of. That's what we deal with here at After School. What role do you feel that anonymity plays in our communication today?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I think with that, it's been such an oxygen sucker over the last couple of years, because I also had a role at Ask FM, and that was one of the main kind of topics of conversation there as well. And what always comes up is, how do we balance the need to sometimes be public and then sometimes be private? So, for example, and this is, again, what we have a tough time thinking about, right? Again, like I said, I'm a 38-year-old white male. So I might not be thinking about, what if I need to enter a chat room and discuss getting sexually assaulted by a teenage boy, right? That's something that a teenage girl might have a concern about and might have a question about. So I think it's a little presumptuous, if I can say that, a little presumptuous to assume that we need to have this hyper-public nature for every conversation, because frankly that could be extremely dangerous, in the sense that the online community is supposed to be able to offer support. And if everything is made public, that can actually create a chilling effect on our speech. And the very beauty of online communities is supposed to be to extend our freedom of speech. That being said, what we always want to work on is what incentivizes good or bad behavior. The concern that people always bring up, private types of communications or anonymity, is we assume that that's going to lower our inhibitions, and it's going to cause us really to be jerks online, right? When you really break it down. But that's actually, even though it seems like a new conversation, that's actually a very philosophical, age-old conversation, because we've always got into the debate of, why do people act either good or bad, right? Are we inherently good or evil, or do we have to be motivated by something? And I think what's a little flawed in assuming that anonymity is always going to lead to bad behavior is because you could flip it around and say, well, if I help somebody out on the street, do I help them out because I'm being watched, because it's being reported, because somebody can like what I'm doing? No, right? My internal motivation is my own level of morality, my own level, my own code of ethics. So I think we can apply the same thing. So for any type of anonymous or private type of chat, it really goes down to the idea of, you want to make sure that people recognize that they want to be good, right? It's not because they're going to get in trouble. You don't just do good behavior because you don't want to get in trouble. You do it because that's the right thing to do, and that's, again, where digital citizenship comes into play. If digital citizenship is truly effective, we should be able to make the entire world anonymous, and we would still have really good behavior. But the key part, and I always like to think of, the Stanford prison study and things of that nature, the key part really is on the environmental structures of social networks. And this is something that I don't think is necessarily focused on enough currently in the digital citizenship conversation, is that these subtle tweaks, right? And I know this from talking to other people kind of in industry, these subtle tweaks can have major effects on how we act, right? And we've always looked at this in other aspects of life. We've talked about, hey, if you change the color of a table to red, we eat faster, right? In Italian restaurants and things like that. So we know that there's a lot of subtle psychological tweaks, and I think we're finding that with any type of social platforms, that we can make tweaks that can really, incentivize our better angels, as the saying goes.
And David, thank you once again for joining me. How can people learn more about what you're up to?
Sure. Well, I'm easy to find online. As you were talking about, kind of at the top of the conversation, I'm currently the Chief of Trust and Safety at Friendbase. So you can check out Friendbase at friendbase.com. But then also the moniker I used online is Tech Ethicist. If you go to techethicist.com or on Twitter at Tech Ethicist, and I think the same thing for Facebook. So yeah, please reach out.
Great. Well, David, thanks again for your time.
Well, thank you. Take care.